Thanks for inviting me, and it's a thrill and a pleasure to follow Jim. Um, we could have set this up as a discussion on privacy. That was my previous research hat before I was doing AI, and uh, Jim and I think have a lot to talk about there on points of agreement and disagreement. But we're gonna jump right to AI as this is getting set up. We're sitting at the University of Toronto, right? And it's useful for us to recognize that about a decade ago, a couple of blocks down the street in our computer science department, some work that had been ongoing since really the 1980s in that department suddenly hit the public interest. It became clear about a decade ago that innovations by Jeff Hinton and others were of massive commercial potential. And so through our computer science department, future heads of research at Apple, at OpenAI, and at Google passed through. And this is thinking about a theme of Jim's of this Canadian innovation that ends up elsewhere. That's going to be that was part of that story. Now, you guys have been in a university. You know how a university works. And so there's exciting stuff happening in our computer science department. And the way that would normally work, get this mic at the right place, there it is. The way that would normally work for sitting the business school is we might open the bulletin. In the old days it would have been the paper, but now it's an email. And you would have seen, hey, look at that. Someone from computer science department won the Turing Award. Isn't that fantastic? People from our computer science department are doing great things. Isn't that fantastic? And then we'd go about our own, sort of narrow research agenda and not think about it again. Now, Ajay Joshua and I, my co-authors and I, we run this organization called the Creative Destruction Lab, which is a program for science-based startups. We started it by luck right as the excitement about AI coming out of our computer science department took off. And so in our very first cohort, way back in 2012, we had this company called Atomwise, run by a PhD student out of Hinton's lab, that said they were using artificial intelligence to discover new drugs. And back in 2012, that just seemed crazy. And then the next year, we had two more companies saying they use AI for totally different applications. Finally, to the point where in 2015, we had a flood of AI startups. They were half of the startups in our lab, saying they were using AI in banking and financial services and insurance and product development and retail and all over the place. And at that point, we realized there was something to this, and we decided to dig in and try to change our research agendas from where they had been, which was focused on the internet, in my case, privacy, to thinking through the opportunities in AI. That led to our first book called Prediction Machines. And over the next 5 years, actually, it was impatience. It wasn't that things were going so fast. It was actually things were going too slow that led us to try to understand what was going on with this new book, Power and Prediction. Okay. So, I've never been invited here before. I assume I'm invited here because suddenly a lot of people are excited about AI. Okay. And it has reached everybody. If you are paying attention, maybe it's a game changer that society and industry need to be ready for. Maybe we have future AI overlords. I don't know. There's this narrative that clearly AI is going to win. Daniel Kahneman, winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics, the only psychologist to win the Nobel Prize in Economics, said clearly AI is going to win, and how people adjust is a fascinating problem. Okay. It's a fascinating problem if you're at the end of your career, but when I talk to my students, they don't find it a fascinating problem. They find it a terrifying problem. And the reason it's terrifying is because there's just this underlying confusion about what we're talking about when we're talking about artificial intelligence. Jim highlighted a fair bit of this. When you read the press, you get this sense that when we hear about today's AI, we are in the world of science fiction. We're in the world of machines that can do just about everything we humans do. Maybe they listen to us, as in some science fiction like Star Wars. Maybe they don't listen to us, as in the Terminator. But either way, we have this idea of an artificial general intelligence that's about to take over the world and destroy humanity. This idea is not crazy. So let's just lay that out. Okay. The idea that we can create machines that can do everything we humans do, that's from my understanding of the computer science and the psychology, is possible. I witnessed a discussion between Professor Daniel Kahneman and Jan LeCun a few years ago that convinced me that someday this might happen. You talk to the computer scientists in the 1960s, they expected this to be 20 to 50 years away. If you talk to the computer scientists 5 years ago, they expected this to be 20 to 50 years away. Okay. Today, based on the advances we've seen in the last few months, there are some who think this is imminent in a way that I've never seen before. Okay. Imminent as in 5 to 10 years. But the technology that we're actually talking about today has very little to do with the artificial general intelligence. That part hasn't really been invented yet. I just think it's imminent. It's a lot of innovation. You guys are, you've been around universities. There's a lot of innovations that are imminent for decades. But what we actually have, the technology we're talking about today, is prediction technology. It's just statistics. It is incredible statistics, but it is statistics. It's using information you have to generate information you don't have. All of the core innovations in artificial intelligence over the past decade or more are in prediction technology. So that means you need to think about the data you have and what you're trying to generate. In our first book, Prediction Machines, we said, this can represent, we're economists, just in case that wasn't clear. So we're economists, we think about this as a drop in the cost of something fundamental, a drop in the cost of prediction. That's what's changed. The book came out in 2018, so we said, hey, we're on the cusp of this massive drop in the cost of prediction. And Economics 101 tells us that when something gets cheap, we do more of it. Demand curve slope downward, the language that we use. So when the price of prediction falls, we're going to do more and more and more prediction. Today's AI is prediction technology, and we have seen this massive increase in the use of machine prediction in all sorts of different applications. We've seen it in banking to predict whether you're going to pay back your loan. We've seen it in insurance to predict whether you're going to make a claim. We've seen it in medical diagnosis to predict what might be wrong with you, the cause of your symptoms. But there's a difference between, and we've seen it in image recognition, right? That how do your eyes recognize a familiar face? They take in light signals and they fill in the missing information of a label in a context. Yes, the signal processing literature in psychology understood that in the 60s, but as an engineering problem, we didn't solve it until much more recently. There's an important distinction between the first two, which is banking and insurance, and diagnosis and image recognition. And that distinction is, had you asked somebody 20 years ago, which of these are statistical prediction problems, most people would have realized, most people who understood what a statistical prediction problem was would have realized that, yeah, okay, whether you're going to pay back your loan, that's a prediction problem. But medical diagnosis, that doesn't sound like a prediction problem. What's changed is as machine prediction has gotten cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, quality adjusted, we've started to realize that there's these new kinds of prediction problems that we didn't used to think of as prediction problems. What's happened in the last year is an entirely new set of prediction problems. It turns out coherent writing is a prediction problem. What is it? There's a query, and it's what does the corpus of data in the world suggest is probabilistically the right response to that query. So ChatGPT is using statistical prediction, all sorts of incredible innovations in how to do that and how to do it with data at scale, but it is statistical prediction, and the benefits and costs of that, and limitations that you might remember from when you took or taught stats many years ago, apply here. Image generation turns out to be prediction. If you ask DALL-E, I want an image of an astronaut on a horse in the style of Andy Warhol, it will give you an image of an astronaut on a horse in the style of Andy Warhol, predicting what in the style of Andy Warhol means from some data, from images of astronauts, what an astronaut is, and from images of people on horses, what a person on a horse looks like. It's all prediction. And so as we've seen these more and more and more opportunities in prediction, we've started to think through, well, maybe this is a transformative technology. Jim kept talking about AI as a general purpose technology. There's been a handful of general purpose technologies throughout history. There was computing and the internet, and there was electricity. And a lot of the hype frames AI as a new form of electricity. Right? It's going to transform the way we work and the way we live. Here's how you can imagine that as a thought experiment. Imagine you're turning up a good old-fashioned volume dial. And currently your predictions are okay, and they're going to get better and better and better and better. So here's an example of a currently okay prediction. Amazon predicts what you might buy. Computationally, actually, what they do is incredible. There's hundreds of millions of products in their catalog. They're going to send you some predictions, and they're going to be right about what you want to buy, something like 1 out of every 20 times. Okay. Think about the statistical power there. It's amazing what they're doing. But what I mean by it's okay is at 5%, Amazon's business model is the same business model they were in back in 1995. 2 decades ago, if you went to Amazon and they made a prediction about what you're going to buy, almost everybody in this room would have received a recommendation for the Da Vinci Code. Why? Because that was the most popular item in 2003 on Amazon. And so everybody got the same recommendation. Now the recommendations are better, but they work in their workflow exactly like they used to. You go to their website, their catalog, you order something, they send that information to the warehouse, and they ship it to your door. That's how Sears catalog worked well over 100 years ago too. Now, imagine turning up this dial so that instead of 5% accurate, it's 10, 20, 50, 70. At some point, they're going to be accurate enough that they won't wait for you to order, right? They'll just ship it to your door. And it seems crazy, but why not? And even if you don't want it, they'll get a big enough share of your wallet that it's worth it for them, presumably, to build a whole infrastructure around that. In case you think that's totally crazy, here's Amazon's patent for anticipatory package shipping. They've thought of this. But then if you look deeper, you realize they thought of it a decade ago. And here we are a decade later, and it hasn't happened. In fact, when you look at companies, even among those small fraction of companies that had adopted AI as of a year or two ago, most of them say they haven't received a benefit. They've adopted and they just haven't seen the payoff. It hasn't been worth it to invest in data systems and data scientists and software engineers and all these other things. How can we make sense of that if AI is the new electricity? Well, let's talk about electricity. So Edison's patent for the electric light bulb was 1880. Tesla's patent for the alternating current motor, 1890. If you were paying attention in the 1880s, it was clear that electricity was going to transform the way we lived and the way we worked. But it wasn't until the 1920s, 40 years later, that half of US households and half of US factories adopted electricity. It took 40 years of wandering and trying to figure things out before most people were impacted by electricity at home and at work. How did it take so long? Well, here's what a factory might have looked like in the 1880s. The factory is centered around a power source, typically a steam engine, and all of the machines in the factory are located based on their power needs. So if you remember your physics, the farther distance, so every machine has to be connected through a belt. You can see the belts here to the centralized machine. And so energy dissipates with distance. And so you try to locate as many machines as possible, especially the most power hungry machines, near the power source. And so the geography, the microgeography of the factory was determined by power needs. And things moved all over the place, and you tried not to move things too much because it was kind of chaotic. And what happened when electricity first came on scene is a handful of people said, you know what? That's going to save me some money. Electricity might be cheap power. and they took out the steam engine, dropped in an electric motor into the exact same factory. The exact same point. It's a point solution. And when you take out the old process, put in the new process, but keep the rest of your workflow exactly the same, those point solutions often end up being incremental. And what we saw in the adoption data by 1900 is very, very few factories had adopted electricity. But then around 1900, a few people realized that electricity wasn't just cheap power, it was distributed power. It allowed you to decouple the power source from the machines. And that enabled an entirely new logic of how to design a factory. The quintessential 20th century factory, the Henry Ford style factory, is a direct result of what electricity enables, which is inputs in one end, outputs out the other. And the logic of the workflow is the logic of production. The modern assembly line is a direct, the 20th century assembly line is a direct consequence of what electricity enabled to happen. And it was around 1900, once they figured out what that new factory looked like, that we saw a change in the trajectory of adoption. Point number two, transformation opportunities for AI, just like with electricity, are for reimagining what organizations can do, developing system level solutions, not point solutions. And so we sit in the between times. It's like we're in the 1890s. We recognize the potential of the technology, but we haven't figured out what the organization of the future looks like. And since we haven't figured out what the organization of the future looks like, too many people are saying, it hasn't been worth it. And many other people are saying, we can see the harms, but where's the benefit? That was true in electricity in many ways. Electricity caused a lot of fires. It was dangerous. But it really did, in the end, make our lives much better. And there was this difficult between time period from the 1890s to the 1920s in figuring all that out. And that's where we are now. How does AI disrupt? What is it about AI as opposed to electricity that makes things different? Electricity was distributed power. It decoupled the power source from the machines. AI is prediction. Right? Today's AI is prediction technology. And reason that predictions are useful is they help you make better decisions. That's what predictions are for. But prediction is not decision making. When you make a decision, there is a prediction, the likelihood that different things are going to happen, and there is a judgment about what matters. That judgment remains inherently human. There is no such thing as a machine decision. What machines do is they decouple that prediction from judgment. And they give you a machine prediction, which can change the human who provides the judgment. So let me just unpack what I mean by prediction and judgment in the context of some science fiction. So I don't know if you've seen the movie I, Robot. I mean the movie, not the book. It's not, the example's not quite in the book. Okay. So it's a fine movie, but it's great science fiction. Here's why it's great science fiction. There's this flashback scene. So Will Smith's the protagonist, and he hates robots. And the flashback scene is about why he hates robots. And he and this little girl are in a car accident. And for whatever reason, they're both sinking into a river. And it's pretty clear that they're both about to drown. And then a robot comes along and saves him and not the girl. And that's why he hates robots. It was a robot, so he could audit it. He could figure out why the machine saved him and not the girl. And it turned out the machine predicted that he had a 45% chance of survival. And the girl had an 11% chance of survival. And so that's why the robot saved him and not the girl. 45 is more than 11. And he said, but 11% was more than enough. And a human being would have known that. Well, that's a statement about judgment. Somehow, the robots in his world were programmed to think a life is a life. And he thinks humans would value a child's life at more than an adult male's life. I don't know that we would think his life is worth less than a quarter of her life. as a general human point of view, but that remains inherently human. And even, interestingly, in this fictional world with artificial general intelligence, that remained inherently human. Someone programmed that robot to say a life is a life. It's a human decision about what we value, not a machine one. So AI decouples prediction from judgment, and that creates the opportunities for understanding the organization of the future, but also creates challenges because it's uncomfortable to think about how much is a life really worth. It's not something we like doing, to really think deeply about what we value. And it can also change who makes that decision, as opposed to the person on the ground making the rescue. And in this case, it was some engineer many years ago, or presumably some team of engineers, deciding what how to value different lives. So AI is useful for decision making. It decouples prediction from the rest of the decision. Okay, so is this coming for you, your kids, your grandkids, your industry, the things you care about? The thing to try to think through is how much of what you do is driven by helping people achieve what they want versus compensating people for the fact that you fail. What do I mean by that? Think of this. This is an image of an airport. Hopefully you guys figured that out. It is often voted the best airport in the world. It's Seoul Incheon Airport. It's pretty spectacular. It is a multi-billion-dollar structure. It has fantastic shopping and restaurants, as you would expect from a great airport. It has a museum and a theater, waterfall. Well, the waterfall's in Singapore, but same point. Greenery. It's beautiful. And yet, if I asked every one of you which airport you'd want, I suspect the vast majority of you would prefer to fly through this shed. This little shed is how the super rich fly. This, I'm told, is the private terminal at Boston Logan Airport. The super rich fly through airports that look like this. The rest of us fly through these beautiful structures. How can that make sense? Well, let's think through the mission of Seoul Incheon Airport. The mission of Seoul Incheon Airport is to ensure smooth air transportation. And almost everything they do is about the fact that they fail to ensure smooth air transportation. The vast majority of what they do is compensating you for the fact that you have to wait around at the airport. And no one wants to spend time at the airport. You don't need those great restaurants because hey, let's go hang out at the airport. You need those great restaurants because people are stuck there because they don't know how long it's going to get to the airport, through security, and to their gate. If you had a great prediction of how long it would take to get to the airport through security and to your gate, you would just walk right onto the plane and take off just like the super rich. That's the ultimate experience. And so thinking through in any industry, what are the ways that you fail to deliver on your mission? And then thinking through, well, in the presence of better prediction, maybe without the regulatory protection that the airports have, is that going to be a problem for my underlying business model and my ability to succeed? So you're looking for places where the organization fails to deliver its mission. That's where those are the places that are most ripe for disruption. So we, as I said, are in the between times. Feels like we're in the 1890s. Our organizations look like that steam-powered factory. And we haven't figured out what the AI-driven organization of the 21st century looks like. And that's what's exciting about the innovation, in my view, happening all around the university. Thank you.